The season gets underway on Friday, and who are the San Francisco Giants? Who are their position players? That's specifically what we're going to talk about today. What have they done the last couple of years? How have they been able to outperform expectations? And can they do it again in 2022? So we'll get into all of that next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about the position player mix. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about the pitching as we get ready to start a brand new season coming up here on Friday at home against the Marlins. So without further delay, I just kind of want to mention, so they lose Buster Posey to retirement. And the situation is that Joey Bart and Curt Casali seem to be the players who are going to take over that role. That could change. I mean, if Bart goes out there and struggles again like he did in 2020, that could change. But for now, that's the plan going into the season. And Kris Bryant obviously was acquired in a midseason trade. He becomes a free agent, and then he signs with the Colorado Rockies. Another key addition, Donovan Solano signs a 1-year, $4.5 million deal with the Reds. So the point I'm going to kind of make here is that while these losses are significant, I think that in the aggregate, they're going to continue to be fine and underrated. And we're going to provide some numbers to show that. So the first thing I want to jump into, so a lot of people freak out about their lineup against left-handed pitching. Maybe freak out is too strong of a word, but have concerns about their lineup against left-handed pitching. So when we look at how have the Giants done against left-handed pitching, let's just say since 2020, because that was the year when the new hitting coaches came in, and they clearly have made a big difference. There's no doubt that, when you look at Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, Austin Slater, all kinds of Darin Ruf, guys just having career best type offensive performances, it has a lot to do, in my opinion, with these hitting coaches. So if we look since 2020 against left-handed pitching, on first glance, a lot of people cite this number. You might say, well, actually, this number looks better than people say. So they have a 110 weighted runs created plus against lefties since 2020. And when we take out pitchers, however, it gets even better, and they're at 115. So the Giants have really hit left-handed pitching well since 2020. 15 points above league average production. That's better than the Dodgers, and it's third best in Major League Baseball. Now you might be thinking, but that's buoyed by guys like Buster Posey, Donovan Solano, Kris Bryant, who depart. Well, I'm here to tell you that, yes, Buster Posey was a big part of that. However, he didn't play in 2020. So those numbers I just cited a minute ago count 2020 when he wasn't even on the team. Evan Longoria was a big part of that, and he's currently injured, so that hurts. But beyond that, Darin Ruf has been a monster against left-handed pitching. Austin Slater has been a monster against left-handed pitching. They both have weighted runs created plus of above 150 against left-handed pitching over the last couple of seasons. Wilmer Flores, a weighted runs created plus of 28 against lefties. Solano was at 126. Dubon, 113. So even for Dubon's general struggles in the major leagues, he's still managed to have a role. And that role he's been good defensively in key positions like center field, and also in the infield, second base. He was also rated well defensively, and he's been able to hit left-handed pitching. And I think he's going to get that shot again in 2022, especially with expanded rosters in the month of April. So moving down the list, Brandon Crawford, Mike Yastrzemski, Brandon Belt, they've all been able to be roughly league average offensively against left-handed pitching. And that's significant because these are three left-handed hitters who may see some time in the lineup this year against left-handed pitching. So Crawford and Belt also good defensive players, as is Yastrzemski. So if you can just like hold your own against lefties at the plate and also provide defensive value, that's perfectly fine to be an everyday kind of player. So how about this? Kris Bryant, in his brief time with the Giants, he was actually below average against left-handed pitching. Not that it means anything, but just to say, okay, they were overall 15 points above average offensively. And Bryant pulled that down. He wasn't boosting it up. He actually dragged it down a little bit. If he was still here, I would bet on that going up. But I'm just trying to say 85% of the plate appearances that give the Giants that third best in the league number since 2020 against lefties went to players other than Posey, Bryant, and Solano. And for Bryant, again, he pulled the number down. And so this is not a team that has been overly dependent on those players, and it is really a sum of the parts kind of effort. And so I understand in some ways why it might not be the most exciting way to do things, and you'd rather have a star that you can latch on to, but I do think the Giants are going to be okay offensively. And so this is the side of the plate where people are concerned and saying that it's going to be not just mediocre, but a problem. And I just don't really see it that way. I think they've got enough guys who do damage against left-handed pitching, who are right-handed in platoon situations, and also the lefties that they have with Crawford and Belt being more of everyday players. They have proven to be able to hold their own against lefties as well. Belt has been about 10 points above average over the last couple of seasons against lefties. So platoon splits in a small sample, like single season sample, I've talked about how we try to avoid really reading too much into those. But if you combine the whole team, that obviously makes the sample larger, right? And so the fact that the Giants have been 15 points above average against lefties, this is a 341 on base percentage, a 194 isolated power, just a 21% strikeout rate. They've been monsters against left-handed pitching. There's just no doubt about it. And if we flip it over and look at right-handed pitching since 2020, not counting pitchers, an important thing to do in my opinion, especially now that there is no pitcher in the lineup. So it's going to be a little more balanced. Historically, people look at like, oh, the Giants had this number against lefties, comparing them to the whole league. Well, half of the teams had no pitcher in the lineup and they had an extra hitter. So that's not fair to do. But now everybody's more on a level playing field. But against right-handed pitching, last couple of years, not counting pitchers, the Giants have been 14 points above average, which is second best in the National League. And so they're the only team that's actually in the top 5 in the major leagues against lefties and against righties. They're one of 2 teams along with the Blue Jays that was in the top 5 against lefties and the top 5 against righties when we take pitchers out of the equation. Giants have a 335 on base and 197 isolated power against right-handed pitching since 2020. And the main drivers of this, Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford, have been absolute monsters against righties, especially Belt, who's got a 176 weighted runs created plus, 404 on base, 638 slugging, 336 isolated power, and Crawford not too far behind him. Yastrzemski has been good against right-handed pitching, and I think that gets a little bit overlooked. He's been about as good as Lamont Wade Jr. was with the Giants last year against right-handed pitching. So if it's more of a platoon situation, I think Yastrzemski is better than people are giving him credit for. And also Darin Ruf has done well against righties as well. And so I think he becomes more of an everyday player on this 2022 Giants team. And he's proven that he kind of deserves that opportunity, and he's not a bad defensive player either, even though we might think of him that way given his size. So anyway, coming up next, I'll kind of slow down and take a look at the big picture and like what's the roster going to look like? What is their lineup against lefties? What is their lineup against righties? And ultimately, how do I think this group is going to do? How about defensively as well? The whole package of their position players. So that's all coming up next. But first, all right, as promised, we are going to talk more about the Giants position player mix. I'm a little bit frenzied here. I want to slow down and say, okay, I don't want to get too excited, but I just do believe strongly that they continue to be underrated, and that guys like Belt and Crawford, we kind of write them off because of their age. But if you just look at the pure production they've been able to put up under this new regime, and specifically the coaching regime, they've been monsters. And I just kind of have been tweeting out about Brandon Crawford. There was this superstar class of free agent shortstops this offseason. Crawford was going to be among the free agent shortstops. He wasn't projected to be a superstar, but the Giants prevented him from reaching free agency by giving him a midseason extension for 2 years and $32 million. But we had guys like Carlos Correa, Marcus Semien, Corey Seager. Francisco Lindor was also supposed to be a free agent, but got extended the year prior. Javier Baez, and I think Trevor Story. So it was a historically great shortstop class. And I looked at the last couple of years combined, but also you could just look at last year. The last couple of years combined, almost none of them were more valuable than Brandon Crawford. He was just as good, if not better, than the majority of these star shortstops, all of whom got these kind of crazy long and big contracts, which I'm not saying, oh, that's bad. Big contracts are necessarily bad. But I am saying the production has been the same. So you may want Corey Seager or Carlos Correa or whatever, but Brandon Crawford has been as good as those guys, if not better. And so that's just worth pointing out. And then Brandon Belt, when he's been on the field, has been as good as Freddie Freeman, if not better. I'm sorry, I know that might be controversial, but it can't be controversial, because I'm simply saying, per at bat, he's been as good or not, if not better than Freddie Freeman. I'm not saying that means it's going to continue, but that is what the reality has been over the last couple of seasons under this new coaching regime. So anyway, going into 2022, what are we looking at? What is this roster? Like I said, no Buster Posey, no Kris Bryant, no Donovan Solano. For me, Thairo Estrada can very capably and seamlessly slot into that Donovan Solano role. Solano was a role player, and I think that it always made sense that he would depart and Estrada would take over, given that Estrada is out of options and they're a little bit redundant. And so you'd have to carry both of them or lose one of them, and it made sense to let Solano walk and get younger, more athletic, with a capable player filling in Thairo Estrada. So that's not very shocking there, and I think that they probably won't really miss a beat, even though I loved Solano as a person, as a player. He was a lot of fun and meant a lot to turning this franchise around. I think that it's a loss they can handle. At the catcher position, that's the one that's toughest to replace. We don't know what we have in Joey Bart, but he's a top prospect, and there's a lot of potential. There's some risk, certainly, but I think that they're going to be careful with him and kind of give him good matchups for him against certain pitchers and not really necessarily throw him right into the fire against all the toughest right-handed pitchers, which is possibly an issue given that the Giants don't face a lot of left-handed starters to start the season. Farhan Zaidi said on KNBR recently that they project that they're only going to see a couple of lefties in the first month of the season, lefty starters. And in the first series of the year, by the way, the Marlins have some nasty young starting pitching, and their top three specifically, which is who the Giants will see, are really, really good. And so it's going to be tough, and we might see the offense struggle in the first series of the year. I just want to throw that out there, at least against the starters. I think once the Marlins bullpen comes in, you'll have a much better shot, and maybe they go to the bullpen early, given that there was a quick ramp up in spring training, and maybe they're limited to 5 innings or so. But don't be surprised if the offense struggles a bit against the starting pitching against the Marlins. The Marlins have really good starting pitching, especially their top three, which is obviously who you're going to see, assuming all three are healthy and ready to go. But anyway, Tommy La Stella was scratched from his last spring start on Tuesday, so we don't know yet if he's going to have to start the season on the injured list, which would be a little bit of a problem because their depth is already being stretched kind of thin with the loss of Evan Longoria. Longoria having surgery on his finger and Lamont Wade Jr. dealing with a knee issue. And so to replace those guys, I've got Steven Duggar kind of replacing Lamont Wade Jr. in the outfield. Otherwise, Duggar probably would have been optioned to the minors to start the season. And then in the infield, it does mean that probably Luke Williams or Jason Vossler makes the opening day roster. In fact, it's almost certain that one of those two will make the opening day roster, but probably not both. However, it probably will be both if La Stella has to go on the injured list. It's also worth pointing out, I think there's a reason they haven't yet announced their opening day roster, because they're always scouring the market for upgrades, essentially, and to put themselves in a better position. And this time of year, other teams are making a lot of moves to finalize their rosters ahead of the opener, and the Giants are willing to pounce on someone who's DFA'd or make a trade to help a team, fix its tight roster situation. And so that all remains in play as we move towards the opener. But essentially, if La Stella and Belt are able to go in no particular order, I want to say, their lineup features almost exclusively left-handed hitters they've got maybe 3 righties in there with Flores starting at third, it would seem, although they could go with Jason Vosler and add another lefty to a lineup against right-handed pitching. Joey Bart or Curt Casali, they're both righties, so one righty catcher always going to be in the lineup. And Darin Ruf with that opportunity to be more of an everyday player. But otherwise, they're able to go with La Stella, a lefty at second base, Belt, a lefty at first, Brandon Crawford at shortstop, left-handed, Jock Peterson in left, Mike Yastrzemski in right, and Steven Duggar in center. So 6 out of 9 left-handed hitters, and then the righties who are in there are good hitters, period, and don't really have extreme platoon splits in Darin Ruf and Wilmer Flores. I suppose I don't really know with Joey Bart because there's not enough of a sample. I would imagine he's going to be significantly better against left-handed pitching, but also catchers provide a lot of defensive value, and that may be kind of the main focus when there's a tough righty on the mound, is just go out there and have a good game defensively and hit at the bottom of the lineup. So I think that the lineup there that I just listed off is going to be perfectly fine against right-handed pitchers. And against lefties, you're able to go with Slater, who, like I said, has been a lefty killer. Even with a somewhat disappointing year last year, he still managed to kill lefties. You've got Darin Ruf, obviously, back in the lineup and is a real threat against left-handed pitching. Wilmer Flores, a real threat. Joey Bart in there again, or Curt Casali, whatever. Thairo Estrada playing second base. Mauricio Dubon, for me, in a platoon in center field with Steven Duggar, when you're able to carry Dubon. He's out of options, so it makes all the sense in the world to carry him and platoon him in center field, where he's been a good defensive player over his career, and also he's managed to hit left-handed pitching well. He looked pretty solid in spring training to me, with swing decisions, not a lot of wild chases, which has been an issue for him, and hitting for power, pull power. And so I'm intrigued by Mauricio Dubon. He's looked pretty good to me, and I think that he could run with this opportunity and potentially be a guy who survives past April, because once April concludes, there's going to be a crunch because they're going to lose 2 roster spots. Wilmer Flores, I already have him at DH in this scenario, and I've got Luke Williams starting at third base. I really am intrigued by Williams. He can play all over the diamond, and I think that they like him. He's on the 40-man roster. He does have minor league options, but versatile player, and they quite like that. And in this scenario, I'm able to start him, add another right-handed bat into the lineup against a left-handed starter. So Flores can DH and Williams at third. And then I've got Crawford and Belt also in the lineup as my 2 left-handed hitters in the lineup. There's an alternate scenario where you could just put Flores at third, DH somebody from your outfield, and then have Mike Yastrzemski in the lineup. And then you've got 3 lefties, and if you want to go Yastrzemski over Luke Williams, that's the beauty of versatility. And so to me, those are a couple of underrated lineups, and it's not Mookie Betts, Trea Turner, and Freddie Freeman at all. Not at all. But like I said, Crawford and Belt have kind of produced at that level. I'm not saying it's going to continue, but they have. And the rest of the guys just do well in their role, and they're versatile, and they can kind of be plugged in where they're needed and be underrated and produce that way. So that's the way I see it happening. Coming up next, we're going to talk about defensive expectations. What was the expectation going into 2021, and how did they actually perform defensively, and what would I expect out of this group defensively in 2022? So stay tuned for that. But first, It's that time of year. I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Go to Built.com, scroll down to their macros chart, and you'll be blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, as promised, I want to talk about the defensive expectations for this unit. I really wanted to reiterate, too, how people expected them to be really bad defensively in 2021. So it just goes to show you that we don't know anything, and baseball is hard to predict. And, just like entering 2020, everybody was saying, we weren't saying, but a lot of people were saying the Giants are going to be terrible. Giants are going to be bad, and it's just part of the process towards rebuilding, but they're going to be bad. They weren't bad. They were a good offensive team, which a lot of people didn't see coming. Even though Posey opted out, I get that it was a small sample, but it's all we have to work with, right? It was a 60-game season. That's all we have to work with. And then they carried it over. And the question going into 2021, can they carry it over? It was a small sample. It took career years, and so it was probably not going to happen again. And also defensively, people thought they were going to be bad with the likes of Wilmer Flores, Donovan Solano, Tommy La Stella, I don't know exactly, Alex Dickerson. And some of those players weren't great. But overall, the Giants, let's look at a couple different metrics. Outs above average, which is one of my new favorites. It's, via StatCast data instead of the human eye, which a lot of people, I think, don't quite understand that stuff like defensive runs saved and ultimate zone rating is compiled by humans, and they're just like watching all these different games. And there's a process, we can get into it later, but outs above average is using like the StatCast data. Where did you start? Where did the ball land? It's able to know the probability that you were going to catch it and compare you to other players and say how many outs above average you were able to produce. So for the Giants, they were at plus 29 outs above average in 2021 as a team. This is not counting catchers. They don't do outs above average for catchers. They have their own separate kind of data. But that was 6th in Major League Baseball. And I looked at this like individually. Actually, this is 2020 to 2021. Let's just look at 2021 for now. And I've lost the overall data. So the overall data for 2021 was that the Giants were plus 27, which was 5th in Major League Baseball. And if we look at the individual players, we will see that their worst defensive players were actually Kris Bryant, number 1, where he produced -4 outs above average at 2 different positions. And that was the worst of any player at any position, and he did it twice. -4 at third base. I think anyone who watched like every game of Kris Bryant would agree with this calculation here. He had problems at third base, particularly throwing. He made some critical, really bad throws, and he gets -4 outs above average here in 190 and 2/3 innings at third base. In right field, he also provided, according to this number, -4 outs above average. So when you look at that overall as a team, the Giants were one of the best in the game defensively, and that Bryant provided a lot of negative value defensively. It's addition by subtraction defensively for the San Francisco Giants. I know he wasn't here very long, but they would have been even higher, 8 runs higher without Kris Bryant, although he did provide, I think, 1 out above average in left field. I hope I said that correctly. -4 at third base, -4 in right field, and then +1, I believe, in left field. So there are other negative defenders. Jason Vossler at third base, -4, Alex Dickerson in left field -4. Neither of those players figures to have a super prominent role. I mean, Alex Dickerson isn't here anymore, so he's definitely not going to have a prominent role. But they just continue to me to be an underrated defensive team, and some of their worst defenders aren't here anymore. Brandon Crawford, far and away number one at +15 outs above average at shortstop. Yastrzemski in right field, 6 outs above average. Darin Ruf at first base, 5 outs above average. Mike Tauchman, Austin Slater, Mauricio Dubon, Brandon Belt, Steven Duggar, Mike Yastrzemski. So many guys just average or better defensively, and then you've got a couple great ones like specifically Brandon Crawford, and combined it gave them a good defensive team. So you're talking about a team that's been significantly better than average against lefties, significantly better than average against righties, in the top 5 against both sides, and a team that was significantly better than average defensively. And I mean, there's not much else to a position player group. The only other thing that I can think of is base running, and the Giants actually, I believe, were a poor base running team. So that is one area where they have struggled over the last couple years, and I'm trying to pull that up quickly as we wrap up here. But base running wise, the Giants, according to Fangraph's base running metric, were, where are those pesky Giants? They're towards the bottom. It's the only area. -6.4 runs above average on the bases. So that's the one area where they've not been good. And I get it, you're losing some players, but to me, all these numbers weren't dependent on just a couple of players. That's the whole point of the way the Giants have built this roster, is that it's deep and it's versatile, and they're able to like squeeze out every little advantage, and it adds up. And a lot of people say, oh, they won't be able to repeat this, that, and the other. Well, guess what? You should not expect them to repeat 107 wins. It's for a reason the most they've ever won in franchise history. 106, by the way, the most the Dodgers have ever won in their franchise history. So yeah, I don't expect a repeat of the type of performance that led to 107 wins. But if you can win 95, 93, 94, that could be all it takes to win the division. You might be thinking I'm crazy, but plenty of seasons over the last several, the Dodgers have only come in at around 94 wins, and who knows? I mean, you just don't know exactly what the number's going to be. Again, 106, most they've ever won. So that's that. I think the Giants have a good position player mix, and tomorrow we're going to talk about the pitching, which I'm more skeptical of the offense. I think that it's a little bit running thin already, but on the pitching side, I believe that they could just run through some people. So we'll get into all of that tomorrow, including the additions and subtractions. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues past and present. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Anyway, can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Stay Locked On Giants.